What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be doing a recap and review of the third episode of the new STARZ dark comedy, Sweetpea. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if for some reason you haven't gotten around to watching this episode yet, and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. So, 2 episodes in, I think this show is still going fairly strong, and that's a pretty good sign given that the season is only 6 episodes long. The writers decided to double down on Rhiannon's penchant for murder and mayhem by having her kill a second victim last episode, and they ended the episode teasing Julia's demise. So it's clear that Rhiannon is gonna at least go after Julia, even though it feels like Julia may have a bit of plot armor, so maybe she won't actually end up dead, especially since she's female, and it seems as though the writers are fairly resigned to keeping Rhiannon's victims to the male variety. But I guess we'll see. Now, episode 3, entitled Black Spots in the Garage, starts with Rhiannon walking back to the little junkyard where she ended Mike last episode, no doubt to check on the body. And when she gets there, she finds a cat essentially gnawing on the body, which seems to creep her out a bit. And upon seeing this, she decides to exit the junkyard, being careful not to leave fingerprints on the handle to the gate, and be on her way. Roll credits. Now, from there, we hear Rhiannon, through voiceover, remark, "People I'd love to kill." We then see a young Rhiannon at school as a young Julia and her young friends make fun of her from afar. And the voiceover continues, "Julia Blenkinsop, from school for subjecting me to a relentless campaign of psychological abuse between the ages of 12 and 16. We next see young Rhiannon hiding in a bathroom stall as young Julia peeks over before dumping the trash from the trash can in the bathroom into the stall onto her head as the voiceover continues, "Julia Blenkinsop, for making me spend approximately 32% of my school career hiding in a toilet." Now from there we see young Julia, snatch off a wig from young Rhiannon's head at a school dance in front of everyone as the voiceover goes on, "Julia Blenkinsop, for making me actually want to be dead." From there, we see Rhiannon, in the present, sitting in her father's work truck outside of the Bradgerton's office as Julia celebrates something inside with her co-workers. As the voiceover continues, "Julia Blenkinsop, for having a cool job with good morale and scope for her career progression." We then see her in her father's work truck as Julia leaves the gym with some of her friends as the voiceover goes on, "Julia Blenkinsop, for having friends to do stuff with instead of sitting at home in her dead dad's robe." We then see Rhiannon again in her father's work truck outside of Julia's house as she arrives home to her tall, attractive fiancé as the voiceover continues, "Julia Blenkinsop, for having a really nice house that probably has bifolding doors and a kitchen island, for having a partner who's basically a Ken doll, and for not peeking at school like bullies are supposed to do." She then takes out her father's knife and she stabs the passenger seat of the truck repeatedly as the voiceover finishes, "Julia fucking Blenkinsop, for her perfect little life." Now next, we find Rhiannon at home with her father's knife stuck into Julia's face on a brochure on her kitchen counter. And from there, we see Rhiannon sitting on the floor in front of her television watching a show where we see that a man has stored a dead body in his freezer. And this seems to get Rhiannon's juices flowing, right? She's thinking. So next we see Rhiannon in her garage clearing out her freezer. And then once she's done, she gets into the freezer, no doubt making sure that it will fit an adult female body inside. And she almost lets the lid close on her, which might have resulted in her being stuck in the freezer. And this kind of, goes to show you again that Rhiannon's not good at at murdering people. Now from there, we see her arrive at Tommy's transformation in her father's truck, and she goes inside to gather supplies. Now, as she goes about her business, Craig shows up and he asks if she is about to do a bit of DIY. She replies something like that. Now, Craig offers to help her, but she politely declines as she stacks materials that she's gathered onto the back of her father's truck. Craig then remarks that he knows she's capable before he apologizes for being a knob. Now, Rhiannon replies, "Which time?" Craig responds, at the pub before, and with the emojis. He explains to her that sometimes he can't find the right words and that emojis are the perfect language, before he reiterates to Rhiannon that he's sorry for how he's treated her lately, which she seems to appreciate. Now, she tells Craig that she hasn't read the agreement yet, but that she will. And as she moves to get back into her father's truck, Craig offers to take her for a coffee that they previously spoke about in the previous episode. Rhiannon closes the truck door and agrees to the date. Craig explains that it would just be so he can explain his plan for her father's business, stating that he wants to honor her father moving forward. He asks her about the place next to the Chinese place that makes the posh coffees. Rhiannon remarks that they could just go for Chinese instead, to honor her father. She claims that he really loved the prawn balls there. Now, Craig agrees and asks her when she would like to go. Rhiannon tells Craig that she doesn't know, but that she'll text him, and then she finally gets into her father's work truck, and he walks away. And, the whole "I don't know, I'll text you" is because she's gathering items so that she can do away with Julia. And so it's clear that the writers are making sure that you understand that that is the prime directive and that everything else will kind of happen around her schedule in dealing with that. Now, from there, we see Rhiannon at the market buying the remaining supplies she needs for her plan to do away with Julia effing Blankenship. And we find Donna, the cashier, at the counter on the phone talking to someone named Vaughn. Now, Rhiannon approaches the counter, but Donna continues the conversation, almost oblivious to her. But she does ring up the items. And as she rings up the items, Rhiannon asks for a bag, but Donna ignores her initially. But Rhiannon finally gets her attention and is able to ask for the bag, for which Donna charges her an extra 15p before going back to her conversation with Vaughn. And while that is happening, Rhiannon asks her if she can help her find a pair of extra large durable gloves so that she can use them in her plan to murder her school bully. And of course, this is done by her to kind of be a little bit of a smartass because she knows that Donna isn't paying attention to her. And as she finishes her statement, Donna charges her $29.59 for the items. Now, I gotta say that Rhiannon is still kind of stupid for this, because just in case Donna is hearing what you're saying, even if she's not pretending to hear what you're saying, why you would go out here and tell somebody you're going to murder somebody, then if you actually go through with the murder, that there's a witness. So, again, but these are the writers trying to show you that she's not really good at murdering people. They keep going back to that so that you understand that she's not really good at murdering people. So fair game. Now, as Rhiannon swipes her card in the machine, Donna takes a drink from a Slurpee cup. And Rhiannon stares at the cup as though she's thinking. And as she walks away, she drops Donna's phone inside the cup, causing Donna's call to drop. Now, from there, we find Rhiannon sitting in her father's chair, wrapped in her dead father's robe, right? Eating ice cream that she removed from the freezer in the garage, as she watches a show on television depicting a man, getting his throat cut. And she smiles at the sight, right? So the TV is supposed to be giving her ideas of exactly what to do with Julia effing Blankenship, right? That's what the writers are telling us. Now, next we see Rhiannon in her garage, now dressed professionally, making a call to Bradgerton's asking for Julia. Now, Julia answers the phone and Rhiannon explains that she cleared out the house so that she can come by and get the photos. Remember, Julia asked her to do that last episode and to call her once it was done. She goes on to ask Julia if she's free after work. Now, Julia explains that she's not free, but that she can come by tomorrow evening. Rhiannon thinks for a moment before telling Julia that tomorrow is perfect. Now, I want you to keep in mind that when she called and asked Julia when she's free, that Julia explained that she was not free after work, right? That means Julia's going to be doing something. Keep that in mind. Now, Rhiannon stares down at the garage floor, and we see that it's now covered with a tarp and tape next to her cleaned out freezer, and she thinks before texting Craig and telling him that she's free to meet. He quickly texts back and tells her that he'll meet her at the restaurant at 7. Now, from there, we see Rhiannon arrive at work with coffees and pastry. And she bids her coworkers good morning, but the only one who answers is my man AJ, right? He always on the case, you feel me? She finally brings the coffee to Norman and Jeff, and Norman gently chides her for being late. Again, calling her Sweetpea. I mean, at this point, the Sweetpea counter must be at about 13, 14, 15 here with Norman. She explains that she brought them a posh coffee and that there's pastries in the kitchen. And as everyone makes a beeline for the break room, Lana, one of Rhiannon's co-workers, complains about being gluten intolerant, explaining that she'll just have to sniff one of her co-workers' pastries instead of eating one. AJ then asks Rhiannon if he's not important enough for a posh coffee, but Rhiannon just smirks and walks away. Now, as she passes Jeff's desk, she sees a copy of the latest issue of the paper, the one with the story about Ryan, and she notices that her name is nowhere to be found on the byline. She then walks into the break room and confronts Jeff about it, which makes the rest of her co-workers anxious, and they all get up and leave. Now, Jeff smartly asks Rhiannon if she wrote the story, explaining that that's why her name isn't on it. Rhiannon remarks that he's not being fair, that she gave him the story and so her name should be on it. Jeff explains that if she wants her name on something, then he'll lend her his label maker so she can put her name on a stapler, and then he walks out of the break room as Rhiannon stands there staring at the paper, furious. Now, she then goes into, one of the cubbies in the break room, and she takes out a bottle of milk of magnesia, and she pours it into the coffee cup that Jeff left behind, because it helps the plot move forward. And she pours a healthy dose of it into his cup, just as AJ walks in, thanking her for the pastries. He then asks her if she poisoned them. Now, she nervously denies his accusation, and he remarks that it might be the perfect crime if she had. Rhiannon explains that Lana is gluten intolerant, so she would be her downfall, remarking that she thought AJ was an investigative reporter. Now, AJ remarks to Rhiannon that at the moment she's putting him to shame on that front, before asking her to prove that the pastries aren't poisoned by sharing one with him. Rhiannon ultimately takes a big bite of the pastry, getting jelly all over her face, right? Before AJ does the same. Just as Jeff walks back into the break room, looking for the infamous coffee cup, telling Rhiannon that she has jam on her face. Now, as Rhiannon wipes her face, claiming to AJ that he could have told her, Ryan's mother walks into the office, irate about the article that was written about her son. Now, Jeff interjects, explaining that he's the one who wrote the story and that if she has an issue with it, she should take it up with him and not the administrative staff. And even though it feels like he's taking up for Rhiannon here, he's still kind of being a douche about it, right? He's still kind of trying to put her in her place. Now, Ryan's mom, Miss Lloyd, if you're nasty, explains to Rhiannon that people are egging their house and they're writing things on their car because of her, and claiming that she called her son a bully, and now that's all people are going to remember. Now, Rhiannon claims that he was a bully, that he went on and on at Dave, his former coworker, and he never showed any remorse because that's what bullies do, that he deserved it. And at that moment, the office goes completely silent, and everybody kind of looks at Rhiannon as if she's absolutely said the wrong thing, before Miss Lloyd begins to cry profusely and storms out of the office. AJ approaches Rhiannon and asks if she's okay. My man AJ, always on the case, you feel me? Now, Rhiannon simply remarks that people can't do things like that and get away with it. Now, later we see Rhiannon, still at work, entering the office with office supplies to find that Jeff has been in the bathroom sick for the last 20 minutes. When he finally opens the door, his coworkers are absolutely repulsed at the smell. He is then helped home by another coworker with Norman's blessing, who hopes out loud that it wasn't the pastries because, he had 3. Rhiannon chuckles at the sight before telling Jeff to get well soon, as he exits the office with, help from his coworker. Now, next we see Rhiannon sitting at her desk putting on makeup. She exits the bathroom dressed for her date with Craig just as my man AJ is leaving the office, and he's surprised to see her looking that way. He tells her that she looks different before asking her if she'd like to go for a pint. Now, she declines, and he asks if she has a big date, right? Rhiannon responds, telling him that she has a meeting for her dad's business. AJ then creates an awkward moment before ultimately exiting the office. Now, from there, we see Rhiannon sitting at the table in the restaurant alone, and the waiter asks if she wants to order. She tells him that she's waiting for someone. The waiter then explains that they'll be needing the table soon, so she orders the banquet for 2. Just then, Craig walks in, apologizing for being late. Keep that in mind. Rhiannon stands, and the pair share an awkward hug before ultimately sitting back down at the table. Now, Craig remarks after looking at what Rhiannon is wearing that he feels underdressed because, he's wearing like a t-shirt and jeans and this little kind of vest thingy, before he gets right down to business of sharing his plans for Rhiannon's dad's business. He asks if she has the agreement, and Rhiannon nervously replies, "Was I supposed to bring it?" Craig explains that was the whole point of them getting together, that he was going to talk her through it. Rhiannon apologizes, explaining that she's been distracted as of late. She explains that she has this really big thing happening tomorrow, and after that, she'll be all sorted. Now, Craig tells her that he remembers most of it, that it basically consists of taking advantage of all the rich assholes moving out of London. Rhiannon interjects, asking Craig what kind of music he likes. He tells Rhiannon that he likes the usual before explaining that someone named Sean is good at making TikTok videos and the like. Rhiannon then tells him that they can talk about the business later and that he should have a prawn ball. Now, at first, he looks kind of frustrated, but he eventually gives in and catches the vibe, right? And upon leaving the restaurant, Rhiannon thanks Craig for dinner. He explains to her that he didn't pay, which makes Rhiannon anxious. Craig then begins laughing, explaining that he paid while she was in the bog. I guess that means bathroom. I don't know, in the UK. But Rhiannon then apologizes that they didn't get to talk about the business before asking Craig if he has a copy of the agreement at his place. He explains to Rhiannon that the copy she has is the only one before she rushes in for a kiss. The move surprises Craig at first, but after a moment, he kisses her again and the pair go back to his place and they have sex. Now, the next morning, as Rhiannon leaves Craig's apartment, in a celebratory mood, mind you, she gets a call from DC Marina Farrow of the North Berkshire Police, asking her to come in and help with their inquiry about the incident at Meadow Lane Lock. Now, Rhiannon asked DC Farrow how she got her details, and DC Farrow explains that she paid for entry at the Square nightclub using her contact list, and that they're just following up with people who were in the vicinity, that they'd like to talk to her right away, and that it shouldn't take long. And Rhiannon reluctantly agrees. So we next find her sitting across from the two police officers from the bar in episode 2, and they ask if she saw anything the evening of the incident that might help them with their investigation. Now, Rhiannon explains that she didn't see anything, and at that point, Sergeant Rory, asks, what she was doing in the area that evening. Now, Rhiannon explains that she was just out drinking, that she was pretty hammered, and that's why she didn't see anything, that she was too busy trying to walk in a straight line. Now, Sergeant Rory claims that he likes her brutal honesty, that it's a real time saver. And DC Farrow asks Rhiannon what the occasion was. Now, Rhiannon explains that both her dad and her dog had just died, and Sergeant Rory, after offering Rhiannon his condolences, shows her a picture of his dog on his phone, remarking that he is his world. Now, DC Farrow offers her condolences before asking Rhiannon what time she went to the club. Rhiannon explains that she went about 11 and that she was there until late. DC Farrow asks if she was there with anyone or if she saw anyone she knew. And Rhiannon, after remembering, her confrontation with Julia at the club, asks why. Bad move. DC Farrow explains that they may have seen something. Rhiannon explains that she was with friends. DC Farrow asks for names, and Rhiannon is forced to name Julia and her friends. Now, both detectives take notes before DC Farrow asks for their contact details. Rhiannon responds by telling the detectives that there was a group of laddie lads who were always in the way on the dance floor and that maybe they could have done it, that it seemed like they were up for a fight. Now, Sergeant Rory asks Rhiannon for her account and tells her that they will check it out. Just then, another detective, D.I. St. John, enters the room, and Sergeant Rory explains that they have a great lead on some laddie lads. So that means, that must mean that D.I. St. John is their boss, right? So she remarks that she needs a word with Sergeant Rory, and they both stand up, and Sergeant Rory exits the room, leaving Rhiannon sitting there alone with DC Farrow. Now, after a brief silence, DC Farrow says, "Roar," right? And Rhiannon looks confused, but remember in the first episode she was roaring into the mirror, and then in the second episode she literally sang "Roar" at the bar. Now, DC Farrow does continues, "Katy Perry, you were singing it the other night at the Bell." She explains to Rhiannon that she knew she recognized her. Rhiannon then asks DC Farrow if she had a problem with her boss not seeing her. DC Farrow replies, "Yes." Rhiannon explains that she has the same problem. At that moment, Sergeant Rory returns, explaining that they're going to have to wrap the interview up. Rhiannon asks if everything is okay. Another bad move, right? Sergeant Rory explains that something popped up, nothing that she needs to worry about. He then thanks Rhiannon for coming in and tells her to take care. And as Rhiannon exits the room, DC Farrow explains that they'll be in touch. Now, as Rhiannon exits the police station and walks down the street, she calls Bradgerton's and asks to speak to Julia again. When Julia answers, Rhiannon explains that she can't meet tonight, that she's not feeling well. Julia explains that she can't do it tonight either before asking when they can reschedule, and Rhiannon tells her that she'll call her and ends the phone call. Keep that in mind. Now, as Rhiannon walks back into the office, she notices everyone gathered around Jeff, who is taking a call. She asks what's going on, and Jeff hangs up the phone and he explains to everyone that there's a second body, to Norman's delight. Now, AJ asks if the second body is linked to the first. Jeff tells him that it sounds like it. Rhiannon asks how could they know. Jeff remarks that the same weapon was used in the second killing as was used in the first. AJ asks if the police found the weapon. Jeff explains that they have not found the weapon yet, but that they're using the size of the wounds to confirm that it'll take a day for full forensics. AJ remarks that this is how killers usually get caught, that they don't know when to stop. He goes on to remark that the killer will probably be some weird loner, and that he heard that on a podcast. So Norman tells Jeff to get to the scene. He tells AJ to find out all he can about the second victim before he explains to the rest of the staff to be extra vigilant walking home drunk, calling out Claudia specifically before reiterating that there's a killer on the loose. Now from there we see Rhiannon on the bus scrolling through Julia's Instagram. She then texts Craig and asks if he wants to hang out, that her plans fell through, and that she could come over. Now, Rhiannon then walks into her garage and begins to pack up her murder materials, but she stops when she gets a text back from Craig stating that he can't hang out because he's working late, that he has a new boss. He then texts again a simple X, which seems to make Rhiannon smile. And, look, I'm an older guy, but the X is supposed to mean like kisses, right? And Rhiannon was almost going to text him an X, but she decided not to do it, so that's why she smiles, because it's like a term of affection. Kind of a romantic, with a romantic meaning for those who might not know, right? So Rhiannon then shows up at Tommy's transformation in her father's truck, dressed for a date with a bottle of champagne. And I think she does this because he texted the ex. So she's thinking, oh, okay, we're in a good spot here. I can just show up at the workplace dressed, with my good knickers on, you feel me? And we can, and maybe I can get him to get down with me on, at the workplace. So, but when she walks inside, she finds Craig inside with Julia, going over plans for a remodel. And something interesting happens because Julia's purse, her phone and her jacket are over by the door, but they're over on the other side of the room. Now, when Rhiannon sees them both, they say hi in an awkward fashion, and Rhiannon explains that she came by to drop off champagne for the guys for working so hard, before asking Craig what Julia's doing there. Craig explains that they're going over the plans for Tommy's house, which seems to surprise Rhiannon. Julia then tells Rhiannon that she's putting in an offer on Tommy's house, that she had already spoken to Saren, and that she plans to flip the house. Now Rhiannon looks angry as she replies, "I'm sorry, you're buying my house?" Julia explains to Rhiannon that it's just an idea and that she doesn't need to freak out. At that moment, Rhiannon drops the champagne bottle on the floor, breaking it accidentally, before she grabs Julia's phone and kind of walks out while Julia's not looking. She gets back into her father's truck and she yells out in frustration. She's roaring again, right? She pauses for a minute to think before noticing that Julia has several missed calls and texts from Marcus, her fiance. She starts the truck and then the headlights illuminate Julia's car parked on the other side of the lot, and Rhiannon looks as though she has an idea. Now she gets out of the truck and approaches Julia's car this time, eventually using her father's knife to pierce one of her tires. She then gets back in the truck and awaits for Julia to come outside. When the pair exit the building together, Craig gets in his car and drives away before Julia even notices that her tire is flat, right? Because it helps for the plot, right? She then looks for her phone, but doesn't have it because Rhiannon has it, right? Duh. Rhiannon then gets out of the truck again and approaches Julia, asking if she has, and Julia asks if she has keys to the building, that she must have left her phone inside. Rhiannon then tells her that she doesn't have keys. Julia asks if she can call Craig. Rhiannon explains that he doesn't always pick up when she calls. Notice how Rhiannon is being protective of Craig. She doesn't want to call Craig for Julia, right? Just keep that in mind, right? Julia then asks if Rhiannon can call her an Uber so she can get home. Rhiannon explains that she knows how to change a tire in theory. So she doesn't want to call her an Uber, right? Julia explains that she can change a tire in theory too, but that she doesn't even think she has a spare because, it helps the plot, even though, the spare would go underneath the little trunk access point in any car. So why there wouldn't be a spare, I don't know, but it helps the plot, right? Rhiannon offers to give Julia a lift, but she refuses. Rhiannon then replies, "Fine, just didn't want you to become another headline." And then she starts walking back towards the truck. And at that point, Julia has no other choice but to accept the ride. Now, on the way, Rhiannon asked Julia what kind of music she likes. Now, she asked Craig the same thing. So this is kind of her go-to conversation starter. Julia remarks that that's a weird question. Rhiannon replies, "What? You don't know what kind of music you like?" So Julia tells Rhiannon that she likes Magic FM. Rhiannon replies, "Cool, me too." She then turns on the radio as she continues to drive. And if you remember watching the episode, I believe that Craig said he liked Magic FM too, right? So she goes on to explain that she likes the station because of their optimism, that they think relentless adult contemporary classics will improve a person's life no matter what's going on in it. She then accuses Julia of having a nice life in a rather sinister fashion. Remember, she mentioned that Julia had a really nice life at the very beginning of the episode, right? And that's why she wanted to kill her. Now, Julia replies, "It's all right." And at that moment, Rhiannon pulls the truck into the driveway at her house, and Julia, just now noticing that they're not going to her place, I guess, asks what they're doing there. Rhiannon explains that she wants to show her something if she's thinking of buying the place, claiming that there are black spots in the garage, the name of the episode, that she might have missed the last time she was there. Julia asks Rhiannon if she's being serious. Rhiannon tells Julia to come on, that it won't take long before exiting the vehicle, leaving her sitting inside. And Julia eventually gets out of the truck under protest and follows Rhiannon inside the house, right? Now, upon entering the house, Rhiannon explains that the black spots might be mold and that Julia might want to have a look herself. And Julia enters the kitchen and sees all the food from the freezer sitting out on the counter. And it's dripping onto the floor, making a mess, right? And Rhiannon, after locking the door behind her, locking all the locks, right? Explains that the house is a mess because she wasn't there last night, that she was out having sex, ... with Craig. She then offers again to show Julia the garage. And as she walks towards the location of the garage in the house's floor plan, we see Rhiannon following her with her father's knife already out behind her back. As they walk through the house, Rhiannon asks Julia if she heard about the stabbing at the canal. Julia says that she did. And Rhiannon explains that there was another body found, stabbed to death, and left to rot behind the bins. At that point, the pair finally enter the garage, and Rhiannon turns on the light, which I think was meant to represent the light bulb going on, metaphorically speaking, right? And then she admits to committing the crimes, both of them, explaining that the men she killed were bullies just like her. She goes on to explain that Julia ruined her life when they were younger, that she ruined it, then, and that she's doing it again, taking away everything that's good in it. She asks Julia why she always has to fuck her, right? And Julia explains that it's just a house, that she can keep it. Rhiannon explains that it isn't just about the house, that she wants an apology. And Julia asks for what? Rhiannon explains to Julia that she knows what she did, and mind you, at this point, she has the knife out in full view. Julia then tells Rhiannon that they can talk about the issue like adults before she tosses her purse at Rhiannon and then makes a break for the door. Now, the pair get into a scuffle, and Rhiannon drops the knife, and it rolls underneath the nearby freezer. And I gotta say that once they started wrestling, I absolutely thought Julia was gonna give her the business, because Julia outweighs Rhiannon by like 30, 40 pounds. But I digress, right? The pair continue fighting, and Julia momentarily gets the best of Rhiannon. I think she kicks her down, and then she runs back through the kitchen. But as she does, she slips on all the water on the floor from the defrosting food items on the counter, and Rhiannon comes up behind her and hits her over the head with a large piece of defrosting meat, knocking her unconscious. And as Rhiannon leans over her, Julia gasps awake. Cut to black. So a couple of things that I noticed about this episode. We see that Rhiannon's list at the beginning of the episode has been now reduced to one individual, as opposed to the list of multiple names that were on it at the beginning of episode 1, right? So I wonder if this is going to be, if Julia is going to be Rhiannon's white whale, in that the killing will end with her this season finally, right? And that's whether she actually goes through with killing her or not, right? So I think we finally reached the point where Rhiannon's not going to kill any more people. And maybe the remaining of the series will simply be about whether or not she gets away with the first 2 murders. And I'll go ahead and say that I hope the writers don't let Rhiannon off the hook here. And I think I've said this in the other 2 videos that precede this one on this particular show. Even though I'm starting to feel like, based on what we're seeing, that they might. And honestly, I think that would be a huge narrative mistake unless the writers plan for there to be another season of this show, which would be kind of wild in my opinion, seeing as how show is being marketed as a miniseries, meaning a single one and done season. But I digress, right? Another thing is that I thought there was a lot of wasted narrative space in this episode wherein the writers were overly preoccupied with having Rhiannon go back down the road she's been down already with Craig. And I get it, right? Craig is the guy she wants, and AJ is the guy that wants her, right? So I understand. I've seen so many TV shows, so many movies where that dynamic is at play, right? But remember, Craig was on her list in episode 1 because she shagged him and then he stopped responding to her calls and texts. So I just thought it was weird to watch her fawn all over Craig all over again, especially since she's been hurt by him already enough to the point where she was thinking about doing away with him. It's painfully clear that Rhiannon seems over the moon as she got Craig into bed, but it didn't play right to me because she had already gotten him into bed before. So I didn't understand what she was so happy about, accomplishing something that she had already accomplished. And I think a much more worthwhile story arc would have involved Rhiannon and AJ spending time together and kind of seeing how that would play out. And look, who knows? Maybe that will still be a part of the story. I just think the first half of this episode was wasted going in circles as it pertains to Rhiannon's season arc. But again, we'll see how it all works out once the series or the season at least has come to a close. And finally, you could see in this episode that Rhiannon went through a bevy of emotions, especially when it came to the Julia of it all, right? She was absolutely planning on doing away with Julia, and then she got the call from the police. And look, she absolutely bombed that interview, right? Rhiannon, again, sucks at being a murderer. And I think that DC Farrow already suspects her for sure. And even Sergeant Rory might suspect her as well. They might have been kind of doing the good cop, bad cop thing. Rhiannon asked way too many questions about their investigation while she was being interviewed, to the point, I think, of placing herself at the very top of the police's suspects list, right? And then, when she found out that the other body was found, it felt like that was the thing that temporarily, at least, changed her plans to give Julia that work, right? She's like, oh, they found a second body. Let me chill out, especially after AJ kind of made the comment, that's how the killers get caught. They don't know when to stop, right? And I think that as people in the office were talking about all of this, Rhiannon was taking mental notes because, again, think about this. She sucks so bad at being a murderer. She's taking mental notes from the people at work. She's also asking the police about their investigation, and she's watching TV shows on television to try to figure out what to do with a murdered body, right? But I think that all changed when she caught Julia at Tommy's transformations with Craig. And again, I asked the writers why. And that might be the only reason why they had Rhiannon go back down the road with Craig so that, they could make Craig. Because I'm going to tell you something right now. I think that Julia is cheating on Marcus with Craig. And that's why when Julia was asking, Craig, could he meet up? He was like, nah, I'm busy. And that's why I think he was late to the Chinese restaurant. I think because he was banging Julia out, probably in Tommy's transformation, had her bent over the desk, giving her giving her the business, right? That LLC treatment, right? And so, look, and to double down on all of that, it's pretty clear. Like I said, Julia's cheating on Marcus, hence the phone with all the missed calls and the missed texts and stuff like that. And to make matters worse, Rhiannon seemed very interested in letting Julia know that she smashed Craig, right? In an attempt to get a rise out of her right before she admitting to having murdered 2 men, right? I think it was, again, to scare the crap out of her, right? For her to be like, oh, I was smashing Craig, by the way, so, we're Eskimo sisters. Oh, and by the way, I killed 2 dudes, so, you keep choosing me and you're going to mess around and you're going to get that Saw treatment, you feel me? And she does all this before making a move on Julia, at the end of the episode. Now, overall, I give the episode an 80%, right? Or an 8.0 if you're thinking IMDb score, right? Now, I happen to think that the show is losing steam, right? These episodes are starting to feel longer as the show is going on. I also think the writers are moving in the wrong direction here. when it comes to some of the smaller plot points, right? The larger season arc, I think, is going exactly, how it's supposed to. The larger beats, right? But I think the smaller beats are where I kind of go, I'm kind of finding some holes that I can poke in some of this stuff. And, luckily there are only 3 episodes to go in this season. So assuming the writers haven't done anything monumentally stupid, there's probably very little narrative damage that can be done, given the circumstances. And look, lots of television shows go through this, right? Starting out really strong and then losing inertia as the train rolls down the track. So in some ways, I kind of expected the cracks to start showing around this time. We are at the midpoint here. And the cracks aren't necessarily huge, but they are present now. Like I said, the first episode of this show was dang near 100% in my mind. I mean, it was really, really good. It was really, really clean. And what's starting to happen now is you're starting to kind of go, I disagree with the decision the writers made here, and here. Just little things that will kind of impact maybe how you view the show once you step back and you've watched all 6 episodes and you can kind of give it an overall score, right? And look, like I said, the cracks are starting to become present now. And I think that next episode is going to probably be really, really important in that it's going to point us in the direction of what the ending is going to be, right? Assuming that, episode 6 is the ending of this story, that is. Anyway, look, I think the show is still good. I think the show is still, really good, despite my episode scores for it kind of being in decline. And, like I said, here we are at the midpoint of the story, and I still find myself interested in whether or not Rhiannon and AJ will get together, whether or not Rhiannon will do away with Julia, and last but not least, whether or not Rhiannon will indeed be brought to justice, which is more than I can say for most television shows these days. But what do you guys think? Did you like the 3rd episode of Sweetpea? What was your favorite part of the story? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd really appreciate it. Also, be sure to go and check out themadScreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all on the next video.